I was muting my mic to avoid so much feedback. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you, Deborah. We just saw your suggestions. Those are great. Thank you.
Well, I don't know. And I wanted to get those to you because I knew I couldn't do anything else on it today. But I can, depending if you send anything back to me before the end of today or before the start of tomorrow, I can take another look at it and send you another version maybe.
I think so. Just in terms of timeline, Liliana is going to work on it over the next week, and she'll incorporate your ideas and your helpful edits. And then when I return, I'm going to our major disciplinary conference in Houston. And then when I return on the 13th, we'll put the finishing touches. So she'll keep me in the loop with her progress on it, on the final steps. And then we can touch base about the final draft before we submit it. I think, when is it due to Michigan?
I believe it's December 15th.
Okay, good. So we have about a month to make sure it's in good shape.
And if you want to meet and talk about it on
Tuesday. Okay, cool. Yeah, we may take you up on that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great.
Coming together very nicely though. It's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing that we started a year ago and we've done a lot. We're here today.
It's crazy. So I'm going to mute and let Stephanie do something.
I'm just going to put this up while we're waiting for folks to join us over the next few minutes.
So I padded in about 5 minutes. So if we want to start 5 minutes after, or whatever you think is best, Stephanie, y'all can get started whenever you want.
Okay. I like to reward people that are on time by starting.
That's a good, yeah, my old boss would say make sure the trains run on time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Otherwise, it's just encouraging bad behavior.
It's true. Oh, odd. Okay, so Annie's having a hard time seeing the visual. Christine, can you see the visual?
Like the title slide?
Oh, I can see you, just my camera isn't seeing me. Oh, got it. Okay, Annie will be sad not to be able to see you, but I'm glad you're here.
So one of the things, Cecilia, you might want to point out to people, and Stephanie and I were realizing this, and if Annie can hear me, she knows I'm a big corporate of this. If people have first 2 monitors and then multiple windows open, they need to make sure they pull the Zoom windows to the front. Otherwise, they won't see the screen share window, because the screen share window is off to the side sometimes there.
Got it. And I'm recording this too, so we can make it available afterwards to people.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. He does something like that.
Okay. What?
Mm-hmm.
So I think someone's mic is on, and we can. I'm not sure if you want us to hear it.
And Cecilia, you can mute everyone since you have power.
Oh, okay.
There's under people participants.
You can my first rodeo. How do you do that?
If you go under the icon that says participants, and then if you open that up, you'll be able to. There should be a link where you are that says mute all and then unmute all.
Okay, so I'm gonna mute all and then I'll unmute you, Stephanie. And in alphabetical order, so.
I can unmute myself.
Oh, you can? Okay.
I don't need you. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. But that way folks can just unmute themselves when they want.
Okay, people can unmute themselves. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. It's just an efficiency.
Got it. Thank you.
Giles, that's your name. That's right. That's right. We'll wait a couple more minutes just as folks get logged into Zoom and get their cameras and all that business set up. I'll just keep my eye here on the participants. Dun, dun, dun. All right, maybe a couple more minutes. See some folks are joining as we speak. Answer a few emails. And then we'll get started.
Are we muted right now?
Nope. Don't say anything bad. Just kidding.
You know me.
Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know there are folks that are going to be trickling in and joining us as they're able, but in the interest of honoring your time and ours, we'll go ahead and move forward. Thank you so much for joining us for this look at the Colorado Civic Health and Equity Initiative, which we'll hear a lot about on this webinar from kind of the broader context of civic health and equity work in the state and how that kind of organically came to be through some work specific to higher education with the American Democracy Project, and then this initiative funded through Cecil at the University of Denver and one of their public good grants, which we all greatly appreciate their support for. My name is Stephanie Schooley. I work with Campus Compact of the Mountain West.
I'm Katie Klein-Hesslink. I also work with Campus Compact of the Mountain West.
We are Campus Compact of the Mountain West in full force. We're going to provide some of the overview and context for civic health and equity work in the state. And as we go through the webinar, just so that you have an idea of what to expect, we'll be hearing, after Katie and I provide some of that broader strategy for higher education engagement, we'll be hearing from Dr. Cecilia Orphan and her colleague Liliana Diaz at the University of Denver around the framework for this initiative, the collective impact framework. And then we'll hear more about kind of the theory to practice at 3 institutions of higher education in Colorado who serve very different student populations, are housed in very different communities. Colorado State University in Pueblo, and that's Dr. David Volk from the University of Northern Colorado, and we have Dr. Deborah Romero, and the University of Colorado Denver, and we have Megan Freewall, and we'll hear all about how they have really operationalized the civic health and equity frameworks that they developed, and then plenty of time for you all to ask questions and think through how the framework or the way in which we're talking about civic health and equity may be able to provide some a way of understanding engagement in your institution and in your local communities. If you along the way have questions or comments, please feel free to click on the chat box. That's there for all of us to kind of continue an electronic dialogue as we go through the webinar. So by way of a kind of broader understanding of how some of this work came to be, how we got to be where we are today, starting in 2013, actually, a group of higher education and nonprofit and business and government folks got together and began talking about whether or not conducting a civic health index and creating a civic health index for Colorado would be helpful, what its use would be, and really started establishing some commitments around working collectively to create that index and set some really solid goals moving forward for how that work could be sustained and prevent the index from becoming just another document that folks work really hard to create and then it sits on a shelf somewhere and doesn't serve a whole lot of good. So there were several organizations involved in this initial Civic Health Index, which included Campus Compact, Katie and I, Metro State University of Denver, the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce Leadership Foundation, Education Commission of the States, the Civic Canopy. All of that is just to show there was a real kind of rich and robust effort from community groups that represented the metro area, but more importantly represented statewide interests, in trying to identify what are some of the strengths for Colorado and its civic health, and what are some of the areas in which we really needed to address some pretty serious community challenges. As we moved forward, at the same time, kind of concurrently, folks at the Education Commission of the states and their National Center for Learning and Civic Engagement were doing some really deep thinking around what a state civic education policy framework could look like, and some best practices for developing statewide legislative priorities and how you would move those forward specific to civic learning and engagement. What we ended up doing as a group is kind of combining those efforts and formed a P20 Civic Learning and Engagement Collaborative in 2015. And that was extremely exciting, one, because the work of the compact is really focused on those pathways of civic engagement and learning, and how that can really be a strategy and a tool both for student persistence and graduation from high school, but also into higher education and the development of some of those civic skills and attitudes that we want to see happening on campuses and in communities across the region. From there, we hosted a series of community dialogues across the state. We received a foundation grant to do K-12, some really kind of deep teacher professional development around civic learning and engagement, and then began partnering with Dr. Orphan at the University of Denver in 2016 for the Civic Health and Equity Initiative. This is really just to give an idea that this work that we've been doing obviously has been going on much longer than even our tenure here, but it's really steeped in an intentional community-based process that has continued to pull in civic actors and organizations from across the state over the years to make sure that the process continues, whether or not one organization goes in a different direction or not. And we're excited moving forward that this is also leading to some possibilities around a civic impact core, which really deepens the student experience in that kindergarten through higher education opportunity for civic learning and engagement. So this is the context of where this initiative came from. We're going to go back to the agenda. Just kidding. Okay. As we move forward, we wanted to provide some examples of how the Civic Health and Equity Initiative, and you'll be seeing a lot more in detail about the actual matrix and the indicators, but Katie's going to give an overview of how we're thinking about this in a broader sense that can be aligned with some organizational, institutional processes for planning and engagement.
Yes, thanks, Stephanie. So I'm going to talk specifically about two sort of macro level strategies around community engagement that we feel this work ties quite well to. The first being Campus Compact Civic Action Planning Initiative. So the Campus Compact Civic Action Planning Initiative fell out of Campus Compact's 30th anniversary and the creation of a value statement onto which presidents from almost 500 institutions signed on to, and you'll see those values there listed on the left. So based on these shared values of the network, Campus Compact wanted to provide a way for institutions to not just measure the work that was already going on campuses, but provide a platform through which campuses could think through their work moving forward and how they could really robustly tie initiatives so that the work that they're doing with the community is comprehensive and not just housed or siloed in one part of the institution. And so as we became involved in this work, it became clear really quickly that a lot of the indicators in this work listed there on the right provide a really good way to think about how campuses are interacting with community, knowing that these indicators here on the right are community-based. So how does the institution influence these indicators here, and how does that tie back or inform a civic action plan moving forward?
Gosh.
We're going to get this.
It will happen. Sorry.
The second piece would be the Carnegie classification for community engagement, and I'm sure many of you are thinking about submitting applications for this elective classification. So you'll also see that the matrix itself provides a way to think through how the institution impacts community, actually looking at not silos per se, but how the institution partners with and influences community work through co-curricular and curricular work, through different partnership articulations, etc. And so this could be a way then for campuses in preparation for that application to really think through what's happening in the community and lift up best practices that they've identified, partnerships that they want to highlight. It could really be a strategic tool for creating and wordsmithing and then finally submitting that plan.
I got it right this time. The last piece we wanted to share, and I know that this is a lot of text for a slide, which is a no-no, so I apologize. However, this is an example of strategic planning, really developing a statement of purpose using the language of civic health and equity. And you can think about this in terms of if you're in a department or a center that is thinking through an articulation of your work in civic health and equity, or for an institutional strategic plan or something specific to an engagement piece that accompanies that for an institution. We have really begun a process, and this is a draft, so nobody put this up on YouTube or whatever, wherever people put things.
Exciting video.
It would be really exciting, yes. But this is a draft of how we're beginning to think through this language and really have integrated in civic health and equity as the kind of unifying framework and lens through which Campus Compact of the Mountain West understands and partners with campuses and the engagement work that's happening on those institutions. And really, as we have been working with our campus-based folks and thinking through what is the most helpful way that we can support higher ed engagement at those institutions, this has been a really compelling way in which not just folks that are sort of steeped in service learning and community engagement, but administrators and leadership at the campus. This is a way that is easy to articulate and to understand as part of an anchor institution framework and part of that role that higher education plays as anchors within communities. So again, this is just another example of how this work, how we're defining and aligning it with broader processes that are happening hopefully at your institutions or within your community. So moving forward, I'm going to turn over the mic to Dr. Cecilia Orphan to continue our conversation.
Great. I'm just going to open our PowerPoint and we'll get started. Hi, I'm Cecilia Orphan. I'm an assistant professor of higher education here at the University of Denver. I'm joined by Liliana Diaz, who's a PhD student in our department. And we're going to talk about the broad framing that we use to help support campus efforts to understand their contributions to civic health and equity. But before we get started, and we've presented this a number of times now, but I'd like to start off by asking you to think through the number of times you've heard a campus official anywhere tout the number of volunteer hours that their students and faculty have given in the community. So how many times have you heard that? Think to yourself. And then how many times have you heard a campus administrator or someone in a campus tout the number of service learning courses they offer, or the amount of financial resources they've poured into the community? And I'd like you to think to yourself about, what does this tell us about the campus's contributions to civic health and equity? What do we know from those kind of input measures? And what I'd like to argue, and what we argue in this initiative, is it tells us a lot about the commitment of campuses to regional engagement and to their communities, but it tells us very little about the measurable contributions of that commitment, of that work. And I'll just give a little personal context for this, and some of you may know this, but from 2006 to 2011, I directed the American Association of State Colleges and Universities American Democracy Project, so one of those big civic engagement initiatives. And we worked with 240 campuses all around the country to try and institutionalize commitments to civic engagement. And one thing we noted was that too often, much of the work, and it wasn't the fault of campuses, it was because we didn't have mechanisms to do so, but much of the work was celebratory, marginal, and episodic. Celebratory meaning that there would be a big splashy day of service and students would go out into the community, and then we would award students and faculty for that work, and we'd have great parties. It was marginal in that it didn't actually touch the core work of the institution. And so it wasn't in strategic planning documents, it wasn't in mission statements, it wasn't in tenure and promotion requirements, it wasn't in the general education. And then by episodic, I mean similar to the notion of it being celebratory, but it would be a class that students take, or it would be a day of service that the campus would host. And it failed to shape campus daily life every day. So what we tried to do in this initiative was to think through what are those measurable contributions of civic health and equity. And of course, the people that we worked with are a lot smarter than Stephanie, Katie, Liliana, and I. So we really relied on them to experiment with developing tools and measures for understanding that impact and those contributions. But before we could do that, we really needed to think through how are we going to support campus efforts in this way. So a little bit about the kind of conceptual framing for this work, because, and we won't go into the methods and the broader meta research study, but we're also, Liliana and I are involved in a research study just analyzing how campuses go about this work. But we really drew from decolonial theory, which challenges and resists this continual subordination of other lived experiences and reinforces the status as valid forms of knowledge. And what does that mean in a campus context? Well, any higher education institution in a region, no matter how prestigious they are often the elephant in the room. It's a huge institution with lots of resources and people at its disposal. So how does a big institution like that go about involving itself with the community? By also decentering the campus and trying to center community expertise. And then we use collective impact to support our investigation of that kind of broader theme. So there are 5 conditions for collective impact. We'll march through each one of them quickly that we operationalize in the project. So common agenda, a shared strategy for measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and the provision of backbone support. So for the common agenda, the first thing we noticed is that campuses, and they'll probably talk through this in their presentations, but they needed to be able to understand exactly what was going on. And so we decided as a group that we would actually conduct an audit of campus regional civic health and equity efforts. So what did that mean? That means that we use the American Democracy Project's tool to try and scan an institution to understand where the pockets of engagement work. Then we understood as a group that we really wanted to understand those measurable contributions to civic health and equity. So that was part of our large agenda. We wanted to try and center community expertise in that work and community assessments of our campus contributions. And then we were also interested in the statewide model and nesting it within that broader kind of civic health network that Stephanie and Katie described in the beginning. And then really important for the campuses and the communities that they work with is to identify areas of strength in community engagement and then areas that needed improvement with regard to regional civic health and equity. And then we were really interested in, one thing I learned through ADP was that it doesn't matter how seemingly similar campuses are, they're very different. So different students, different regions, different missions. So we're really interested in helping support campuses surface unique strategies for this. And then finally, and we're working on this now, we want to transmit this data to policymakers to try and disrupt some of the dominant understanding of higher education being about private benefit and the economy, and also say it's also about the civic stuff.
And one piece that we really wanted to concentrate our efforts was on that equity piece. We've always heard that higher education institutions are the democratizers. And we thought that was very valuable, and to explore these through common measures of regional equity. And so we encouraged some of our institutions that we're working with and within the scope of this project to look at race, income, gender, and looking at a variety of different measures that might give us some insight into the civic health and of the communities that these institutions are located in. So the educational attainment of the citizens within the communities that these institutions are serving. Home ownership, as we know, can provide a lot of information as to the health of a family. Income, employment opportunities, and importantly, the civic participation of the people living within the communities in where these institutions are located. And we really wanted to focus on the equity piece because we do feel that sometimes when we're having these conversations, that's a piece that we don't really address, and pieces that are important for institutions of higher education to really concentrate some of their efforts on. So we did develop comprehensive measures of civic health. And so what we've done is that we've identified literature that discusses kind of the contributions or how maybe Latinos or veterans or millennials or maybe individuals from the LGBTQIA community engage in different forms of civic engagement, and being able to allow institutions to have access to maybe a kind of a database of questions they can ask themselves about some of the populations they might serve. So for example, does the institution offer, voter preparation or explanation of what's on the ballot in multiple languages? Or for the Latino community, if it's an institution with a large population of Latinos living within that community, how do they support that community? And if you want more information on that, feel free to reach out to Cecilia and I, and we'd be more than happy to share some more information on the comprehensive measures. And then I'm glad that Katie talked a little bit about the indicators, because what you're looking at right now is kind of a visualization of what she was talking about earlier. So this is kind of a document that kind of helped institutions visualize some of these health and equity indicators. So as you can see, we have political engagement, public work, volunteering and giving, and then you'll see that it's separated by campus and community. And so it was a visual way for institutions to say, are we engaged in public work or in increasing social connectedness of the residents within our community in the curriculum, or is it co-curricular, or is it embedded within the mission or the identity of the institution, part of the campus civic ethos? And then, of course, working with our community partners, which the institutions will talk a lot about here in a couple minutes, but making sure that we identify whether or not we're engaging in these indicators and how we're engaging with the community partners in pushing forward some of these civic health and equity indicators.
So the third condition is mutually reinforcing activities. So we built on existing campus efforts through the audit process. We tried again to highlight the uniqueness of campus efforts and then share those across campuses so they could learn from one another. We distributed resources, and we'll talk through how we did this, both financial, human, and then also research and information. And then a really big thing was to share best practices and to workshop ideas among the campuses. So if they hit a roadblock, they could go to one another and say, I'm having trouble figuring this out. Can you help me? And then throughout the entire process, Liliana and I collected data to understand how this worked. And then we tried to quickly use that data to adapt the kind of supports we were offering. And then the tools that the campuses developed are really data-driven as well, and they'll talk more about that. And then this is a slide that we all hate because it makes all of us look terrible, but I couldn't find a slide where everyone looked good, so I just decided to go the other way. This slide shows the kind of continuous conversation and communication that we tried to enact. So we hosted bi-monthly virtual meetings in which we all got together. Sometimes we'd offer webinars during these meetings with people who've done this work before. And then we did fairly regular email communication and phone calls as needed. So we were constantly in conversation with one another.
And we felt it was important to provide multiple resources. So not only were these webinars recorded so our partners can go back through, but I was able to record meeting minutes and being able to transcribe next steps for a lot of our institutions based on what was discussed within the virtual meeting.
Great. And then the last condition, backbone support. So as Stephanie mentioned, it's really important that we also, again, give credit to CECL for their generous grant. They supported this work, and we were able to give very small stipends to the campuses that supported some of their efforts. And again, so from the backbone organizations, really DU, Campus Compact to the Mountain West, and Cecil. And we again hosted this bi-monthly meetings. We developed a repository of resources, so studies that have been done about campus community engagement, different ways to assess civic health and equity. And then we had 2 campus visits at the start of campus efforts and at the end of campus efforts. And I'll let Liliana talk through kind of how we try to provide support during those events.
Yeah, so the campus visits were really exciting because we were able to engage with our campus partners, but also to meet some of the community organizations that some of these institutions partner with. So it was important to document those meetings to kind of hear what the community's perspective on the contributions that those institutions are making to their organizations and to the communities at large. So I was able to be there to be able to document that work, and then providing, again, next steps from the community partners' perspective. So what is it that they're saying? Being able to kind of synthesize that information to provide it back to the institutions, and being able to provide feedback on some of the tools that the institutions developed. It's always nice to have an extra pair of eyes and to provide feedback. And of course, Cecil and I working on the analysis of some of this data so we can kind of condense it and be able to provide it back to the larger community.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to turn it over to David Volk, and he will talk about his campus efforts.
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and then I will hit share screen, correct?
Yep. So I stopped sharing mine. You should be able to.
Are you seeing me?
Yep, it's starting. There you go. So if you
I'm good. Excellent. Thank you. We a little technical difficulties on this, but I'm glad to be connected. So part of this is a presentation that we had presented at another venue. So to my colleagues, I apologize. Some of this will look familiar. But I'm David Volk, and I am Associate Professor and Chair of Music at Colorado State University Pueblo, which is a bit of a different role than my other colleagues who work in community engagement offices. I come from it as a faculty member, department chair to this project. And what excited me and where my interests lie in joining the project was around the idea of developing measures that would guide campus conversations about where we are effectively engaged in the community, but also maybe drive us to have a more meaningful impact in the community. Just to give you an idea about CSU Pueblo, if you're not familiar with the state of Colorado, we are the southernmost large city along the Front Range of Colorado, a town of about 106,000. Ethnically diverse, majority Hispanic. That is different than most other cities along the Front Range, and it certainly impacts who we are as an institution. We are a federally designated Hispanic serving institution. That is a critical part of our identity. And when we speak of community engagement, I think that is a particular community with which we are looking to be actively engaged. Point of interest, we are nearly minority majority at CSU Pueblo. And one institutional goal that we have identified and talked a lot about on campus is an intentional effort to reach majority-minority status, which would give us a federal designation as a minority-serving institution. So that's, again, a critical part of identity. I will also say I would be remiss in not pointing out that we were the 2014 Division II football national champions. That is also an important piece of our identity, and I included the picture of our campus, which includes the stadium at the bottom, because we have made very intentional and important investments in athletics as an enrollment strategy at CSU Pueblo. So what I had presented in a previous context was a model for thinking about the full potential of community engagement. And this is me thinking as department chair. So here's a little diagram that I've created, and this dot is me. I live in Pueblo, and I work, of course, at CSU Pueblo. One important annual activity for me and my family is the March of Dimes Walk for Babies, March for Babies. My son has been an ambassador for March of Dimes in different communities that we have lived in, including Pueblo in 2016. I do count this activity as part of my service in my annual performance review with CSU Pueblo. But I would describe this, as important as it is to me and my family, as a relatively low-level impact in terms of CSU Pueblo impacting March of Dimes and Pueblo in this manner. It's more individual volunteer service that I can certainly count on my APR, but that's pretty much the extent of that work. I am also, however, the artistic director of the local Pueblo Choral Society, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to performing choral music in Pueblo. This is a little bit richer community impact. For one, I bring a certain level of expertise as a music professor to the group. Oops. Sorry, I hit the wrong way. And in turn, it also provides an opportunity for me to document service on my annual APR. But as a composer and as a conductor, it is an organization that has performed pieces of mine in the past, and as an outreach for me as a conductor, I also can consider it part of my scholarship creative activities in my APR. So it's a little bit richer of a relationship. Additionally, we have developed through the Pueblo Choral Society and our CSU Pueblo Concert Choir an annual joint performance with orchestra of a major choral work each year. And so this now involves students, in addition to faculty, obviously, and it provides for the Pueblo Choral Society their big event for the year. This is an event that would not take place unless we were jointly combined. For one, the Choral Society and the Concert Choir individually are not big enough in terms of choir size to sing with full orchestra. And the Choral Society itself does not have the funding to hire a full orchestra, so we are able to provide student performers in that and provide a bigger orchestra than they could hire on their own. Additionally, the performance itself is the single opportunity that we have at the university to have our students performing a major choral work in the repertoire each year, which fulfills part of our curricular SLOs, student learning outcomes. This also meets the Pueblo Choral Society's mission to promote choral music. When they have performed my own compositions, that again is part of my scholarship, but it's also now additionally, as I'm working with the CSU Pueblo Concert Choir, it's part of my teaching. So this is a relationship that impacts all three areas that I am working in as a faculty member. And then lastly, a very nice sort of development more recently is our graduates from CSU Pueblo who are working now locally in Pueblo are increasingly now joining the Choral Society as sort of their next ensemble after graduation, which is certainly impacting the membership of the Choral Society. So what I've tried to chart here is a much richer relationship than the previous one. We also, of course, are connecting directly with Pueblo in this event, which is fulfilling the university's mission as a cultural resource, and then also Pueblo's larger desire for a diversified economy, as most studies show that a vibrant arts community and arts performance calendar is important for economic development. And so this sort of chart is my attempt to demonstrate and document a rich relationship in terms of community engagement with the university. And so what we did at CSU Pueblo in moving forward through the Civic Health and Equity Initiative project was to create a set of questions that were asked of department chairs here at CSU Pueblo. I chair what's called the Council of Chairs at CSU Pueblo, so I was using my natural networks in knowing the chairs on campus And that was our approach in terms of doing our audit of what was the community engagement on campus. And what we decided where we wanted to start was to at least identify the major community partner for each department on campus. And this is ongoing work. We still have a very few chairs interviews to do, but at this point, for 15 departments, I think we have identified 12 major community partners for each. And these were the questions that we asked of our chairs in trying to determine the richness of that community engagement. And basically what these questions represent, and I'll back up just slightly, is each question is getting at one of the single arrows that you see on the chart itself. And discovered some interesting things, that for many departments, the major community partner is providing an internship for their students, which certainly is a critically important experience. But we often found that the sort of richness that I was trying to document and show in the previous chart did not actually maybe exist to the extent that we thought. There was not faculty who were necessarily gaining scholarship and research activities through that partnership. There weren't necessarily in all cases specific student learning outcomes that were tied to that work. There was just a general sense that an internship was important. Many majors require them, of course. But the full potential, I would say, of that relationship had not been explored, and that was what we began to realize as we worked through these questions. We also are beginning to follow up. We have just started, and you'll note that these next set of questions, and I'm going back and forth so you can see, are pretty similar, but these are the questions that we're now asking of the community partners to sort of get their perspective on the depth of that engagement. And as an example, in talking with one community partner just this week, learned that their executive director, as an example, has done major professional and academic conference presentations around very specific research that their organization is involved with medical professionals and professors at other institutions. And that as an example of missing the full potential of what these sort of community engagement partnerships could be, we at CSU Pueblo, to date, have not had this person come onto our campus and describe the nature of that research and the presentations that they have done. It's basically unknown to our students, and it's unknown to the faculty even with whom this partnership has developed. The community partner is not angry about this necessarily, but as we began to sort of dig through questions that ferreted out, were we meeting the full potential of these partnerships? This is the sort of thing that we're discovering. No, we're not. There is a much greater potential to these relationships. The last sort of thing that I did as a chair in developing this presentation is I wanted then to go back and look at sort of our administrative infrastructure. We talk a lot about community engagement at CSU Pueblo. It's clearly something that we value, and in our view book and in our fact book each year, in the introductions, there is invariably language that speaks to how we're involved in the community, and that's an essential part of who we are. It is interesting, however, when you actually look at our mission and our vision, that we don't address those specifically. Our mission speaks to access, certainly is our legislative mandate, and it also speaks to diversity, our HSI status, but we don't speak to community engagement specifically in our mission, and even in our vision, which is a little bit broader statement. The one place that I felt maybe we were addressing community engagement is in this emphasis on experiential education, which comes specifically from our recent HLC quality initiative, which was to further experiential education and promote and expand experiential education pedagogy in our coursework campus-wide, which we have done. But of course, experiential education itself is a pedagogy, and community engagement and those sorts of activities would be a part, but not necessarily the entirety of what experiential education is. Further, I looked at our CSU system values. These were developed by the CSU Board of Governors, and we certainly do speak to promote civic responsibility. So I think we are addressing the potential of community engagement there. But as you work through the other values, that may be the only place perhaps that we're seeing that. And then, and this one's on me, I begin to go back and look at our student learning outcomes within the Department of Music specifically. And of course, when we talk about student learning outcomes, we're talking about musical academic outcomes. We're not specifically suggesting that our students should be engaged in Pueblo as musicians as part of their student learning outcomes, something that I want to think about moving forward as a department chair. I also looked at our goals that we have listed in the catalog. And we do have places in which I think we are addressing the importance of the Department of Music as an artistic resource for the community. But even within our goals, there's limits to where we're addressing that. Our objectives, we talk about opportunities for growth beyond classroom instruction. So I think we're certainly aware. And again, speaking of an artistic resource, but I will tell you, as I begin to think about how these goals and objectives and student learning outcomes affect the work that I do as a department chair, it's not lost on me that when I do our annual assessment reports, that what I am addressing and what I'm asked to address specifically is our student learning outcomes. We have objectives, we have goals. They are not part of our annual assessment process, however. I then looked at our annual performance review, and these again are for my own department. We talk about scholarly research in terms of teaching. Scholarly research would be one aspect that could improve one's score on an annual performance review. We also talk about innovations, but then specifically mention technology, not community engagement or experiential education as those. Moving down into scholarship activities, the creative activities, the types of things that we document as appropriate for our faculty in music. We do talk about public performances, opportunities to be guest clinicians, but again, these are tangential perhaps to community engagement specifically. And even under service, I would say service to civic organizations and service organizations would probably not, are generally not as considered as our professional organizations. We do, however, have a strong, and this we have also identified as a major partner for us is, of course, the K-12 schools locally. So we're aware, but we don't have specific places that we explicitly value this within our own infrastructure. And so as a department chair moving forward, I think where I am left at the end of this process is thinking about how we even begin to change that infrastructure itself as we're looking at tenure and promotion, as we're looking at the annual performance reviews. And I just want to end by saying thank you to Cecil and Denver University of Denver and Campus Compact for all their assistance in helping CSU Pueblo, which is sort of at an early stage in developing this sort of work, but I think is critically important to our institution. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So before we turn it over to the next campus, I just want to highlight two things. One, this is what happens when you involve an artist in something like this. You get this beautiful visual representation. So that has been so wonderful and fruitful, and it will be an excellent example to highlight other campuses who might want to take a similar approach and look at more of the networks visually. Second, what's really striking about David's work, and you'll hear this in the next two presentations, is that he was really intentional about finding leverage points within his own institution. So both from his own position and going through his what he called a natural network, and then also looking at key institutional documents and asking, does our rhetoric match the reality, and then also, do we need to reshape our rhetoric or our strategic documents to match some of our goals? So now I'd like to turn it over to Deborah Romero at the University of Northern Colorado. And David, I think you just have to stop sharing your screen, and then Deborah should be able to pull up her presentation. So it's at the bottom, if you just hover at the bottom, and I think I might be able to stop you too.
I may need you to do it because I've lost the.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do you know how
Stop share?
Yeah, there you go. Okay,
Okay.
Deborah, we're ready for you. So it might take her a moment. There she goes. And then I think you're not muted. Okay, great.
Hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. 1 second. Okay. So thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, David, for sharing such an interesting presentation and update. It's so great to be part of a collective experience as this is. I'd like to begin by thanking Cecilia, Liliana, Cecil, and DU, as well as Stephanie and Katie at the Campus Compact, who really are our partners in crime. I think if it weren't for Campus Compact sometimes pushing things into my email inbox, we would miss many of these wonderful opportunities. So thank you all for your leadership and support in inviting us to be a part of this presentation. I'm hoping, as we were asked to today, to share some of the strategies, tools, and lessons learned in assessing campus community engagement at the University of Northern Colorado. I'd like to start by giving you kind of just a brief overview there of what I plan to talk about in the next 15 minutes or so, a little bit about our background and why this initiative, and then the particular approaches that we took to undertake the Civic Health and Equity Survey findings. I just want to recognize and acknowledge these wonderful photographs that you'll see in the presentation today. This is from one of our art classes that worked last year downtown Greeley to design and paint a mural in a very public place. They had a guest artist coming, so you'll get to see more of those images as we go through the presentation. Let me start, though, by sharing a little bit about the University of Northern Colorado and our institutional identity. We are only an hour or so north of the city of Denver. We are one of the oldest institutions in the state, founded in 1889, again, founded by the citizens of the city of Greeley with a view to supporting teacher development for a very practical community need at the time. So we have a long history of community engagement and community partnerships. We're approximately 9,000 and some undergraduate students and almost 3,000, now that number's a little bit outdated, graduate students, predominantly female, and relatively small class sizes. Not on that slide, but that I'd like to add, the community of Greeley, if you've not been here, is approximately 100,000 and growing, with increasingly diverse populations coming into the community, both for employment, resettlement issues. Let me share here our changing student body. Like many of you, and as our communities and cities change demographics, we start to see this reflected on our campus. We have a high proportion, as you saw on the last slide, and you'll see here, of first-generation students, something that we are in fact very proud of, and we work well to serve all of our students. We also have a growing increase in, I think you can see if I run my cursor over it, in students of color. Latino population, this is a number I like to share in different presentations. I've been at UNC now since 2006. When I arrived in 2006, we were approximately 4% Latino student body. Today, and as of our fall census, that number is now over 19% Latino. So we have seen a very significant growth in students of color, but particularly among Latino students. As I think it was Cecilia asked you to think about, how often on campuses do we measure community and civic engagement by statistical points or by numbers? Here are some fun facts that when we began our community and civic engagement work, we would tout, and we still brag these as points of pride. These are numbers that come from our senior survey. I'm not going to read through them all, but you can see that we've got 60% students taking classes that had some community-based teaching or learning experience in them, and 50% having engaged. RSCW for us is research, scholarship, and creative works opportunities. And then I think the bottom number there is particularly interesting. 80% of students from University of Northern Colorado reported that community-based learning or research or service they felt contributed to their preparedness for their future profession. So again, these are statistics that many of us are familiar with when we are studying and looking at the impact on our students of community engagement. But it really brings us to why undertake the Community and Civic Health and Equity Initiative. For us, it was because we had access to data points such as the senior survey. We had institutionally just completed our first 3-year plan as part of our strategic plan to launch and institutionalize community and civic engagement on our campus. We'd also recently secured Carnegie classification as an engaged campus. And we knew and have seen several economic impact reports that probably, like many of your institutions undertake and publish from an economic perspective that's translated back oftentimes into numbers and dollar amounts in terms of what the footprint and investment of the institution has been in different communities or different organizations. However, what we were clearly missing from our perspective was understanding the community voices and the community perspective in terms of not only what our community partners felt about the benefit for partnering with the University of Northern Colorado, but also understanding more specifically who the community partners are engaging with and who in turn our students and faculty are also engaging with when they undertake a partnership with a different community organization or entity. So for us, those were some of the key reasons that we were interested in participating in this work. In addition, I think it's worth mentioning the notion of being part of something bigger than just an institutional effort. For us, the collective impact framework was becoming increasingly important. We had started to conceptualize and frame some of the work we were doing in and across our campus as collective impact, as I think David's example nicely speaks to how he was able to leverage his position as department chair to then bring together program and department chairs from across campus. We've been doing some of that work with faculty and administrators on our campus. But for us, the Civic Health and Equity Initiative was a chance to increase or intensify still further through working with Campus Compact and DU and with 2 other regional institutions. So that, and Cecilia's heard us say this, was kind of part of the driving force between why do this. It's always good when you've got somebody else besides your immediate boss telling you that a report or a next piece of the work is due. So I won't read through that, but I know this is being recorded. You can read there some of the background behind this work. For us, it was a lot about this aspect of collegial support and peer networking and increased incentive to do our work. For us also, and this undergirds much of our community and civic engagement work, we've sought to take both a scholarly and a collaborative approach. We begin first by, these are kind of the tagline for our office, inquiring, reaching out with faculty, students, and community to survey the situation, the current lay of the land. For us also, it's about engaging our office and our work with institutional strategic planning efforts, and how can we align engagement so it's not an add-on but rather a natural part of everything that's happening on campus. And then what's the return on investment, what's the enrichment outcomes from this? And for us, it's the benefit that is derived from bringing together multiple strengths and expertise around a particular issue. What you see here really on this next slide is the process starting from the top that we took to get to pretty much where we are and what I'm going to be able to share with you in the rest of this presentation. So following the application, we hosted some fact-finding meetings with key stakeholders who were really part of our community advisory board. We also enlisted, we're a small office, not unlike many of your offices, I'm sure. So we enlisted support of a graduate intern to assist with a literature review and reviewing matrices and other census data that would help us also align our efforts and what was the information that we were primarily interested in gathering. And then we undertook a community partnership scan prior to the Civic Health and Equity survey. And finally, this was kind of a fortuitous happening. We were able to enlist the support of our social research lab through our sociology department on campus. We have a social research lab that will loan its services, so to speak, to assist in both campus entities and off-campus organizations to undertake survey research. So for us, this was also a way to apply some of the funds from the grant that we received to further leverage what our small office was able to achieve, particularly in terms of fine-tuning the survey design and distributing the survey. So what I'm going to share here with you, this is kind of results from the community scan that we did. Once we had the community advisory board and we identified who were some of our key community partners, we sent out a very simple survey asking for reasons as to why community entities engage with UNC. And we found 4 top reasons: for physical space, be that their own physical space or for them to use space on our campus; the mutual benefit and learning that is entailed within partnerships and engagement activities. Community health issues was also a key reason that partnerships were formed to better address different issues of community health and overall social well-being. So based on that scan and on our review of the literature and through our collaborative work with Cecilia and DU, we decided that we did not need to reinvent the wheel, that there were some fairly good instruments already out there. The instrument that we gravitated towards was the community impact scale, and you can see the reference there at the bottom of the slide. Depending how big your window is, you might need to zoom in. That seems to be a good starting point for us. However, given our interest in understanding the impact on equity and diversity, we needed to add additional questions. And this is where we came to the realization that rather than adding a question at the end, or as you saw in the rubric that Cecilia shared, an additional kind of row or item, we'd ask this question up front as a way to understand what and who organizations were working toward. So we added kind of 3 specific questions about target household, underrepresented and minority groups that they serve, and then specific populations that our partners engage with. So you can see those there. Then we added a logic question. So if an organization indicated that they worked with underrepresented or diverse groups, they were asked to specify who those groups were. And I'll share in the findings what we saw there. We also added some additional items here about how useful the partnership was to their organization and the overall impact, as well as whether they're interested in future partnerships. So what did we find from the survey? We had 128 total respondents. I'm not going to focus on this in too much detail, but you can see it says in community and on campus. We also launched a campus version of this survey, but I'm not going to talk about those findings today, so I'll just list it there. Of the 128, we had 30-some community organizations represented, of which we had 23 unique community partners. So we feel we had, given our size and the communities with whom we engage, a fairly good representation of diverse community organizations. You can see the breakdown there, that 77% of those organizations were what we could determine well-established, 61% identified as nonprofits, 26% civic or government classification, and then a lot of small organizations, which for those smaller entities was one of the reasons that they were interested in undertaking partnerships with UNC. You can see here how this mapped out by primary purpose on a graph. Again, the primary purpose, many listed this as community support, and naturally going back to our history, also as serving and partnering with school districts. Again, I won't read through all of this, but we can see the diverse groups and populations that were served based first on household income. For us, 42% are working with low-income populations and groups. But I think perhaps here, one of the most interesting statistics, 83% of organizations reported that they work with or support racial and ethnic minorities, and 72% serving primarily women. Quick overview of some of the reasons that the community partners engage. You can see on the right-hand side what the UNC partners listed, but community partners really engage to continue engaging because they also see partnerships increasing their organizational capacity, and they're looking to positively influence our community. I know I am nearly at time here, but I just wanted to share, I thought it would be useful and relevant for us to hear. We also had some open-ended questions on the survey, and these are some of the community partner voices. So these are direct quotes from the survey that organizations indicated that partnering with us has enhanced their project, that students bring skills that supported their overall enterprise. I included some here as well that kind of point to direction for future work. Many wish there were more opportunity to work with faculty on classes and a commitment to delivering in Greeley. Some community partners, this was also interested, wanted to hear and deliver lectures on campus as well. So I will wrap it up here. I know I'm going to be pretty much cut off maybe. Our next steps, we're working on an infographic and further dissemination of these findings, some of which you've seen now. And our plan is to figure out how we might relaunch this in 2 years' time or so. So again, thank you very much. I'm going to try and stop my screen share at that point. Thank you again, and I apologize for being about a minute over based on my timer. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Deborah. There's a lot of important information to cover. A few things to note. One is that the input measures do matter, and I think that they are key for different grant opportunities and institutional stakeholders. But what I really liked is that Deborah described how those input measures also are on balance with the output measures or community perception of the output measures. And then she talked about the economic impact study. One thing we're interested in is helping the campuses think through how can they create civic impact studies. And this is a nice thing to do to understand your contributions, but it also potentially can improve, if you're a public institution, your state appropriations. There's a researcher at the University of Minnesota, David Wirtz, who has found that campuses that are able to measure their civic contributions fare better in state appropriations. So there's some hopeful, again, emphasis you can place towards policymakers in that way. So I want to turn it over to Megan Freewall at the University of Colorado at Denver, and she's lovingly called us her overlords. So it's your turn now. Your overlord gives you permission.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's see here. Right. Is that showing up correctly?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought the best thing to start with, as some of the other campuses did, is really highlight the uniqueness of our institution. We are part of the University of Colorado system, the CU system. We are located right in the heart of downtown Denver, which makes us a little unique in some ways. And I think that really has driven the way that we approached the Civic Health and Equity Initiative and the way that we view community engagement through our institution. So I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are. And we'll see if this will work.
There's an energy pulsing through this city. Amplified by CU Denver. You can see it in the people who learn, live here, hear it in our classrooms, and feel it in our streets, shaping lives and forging futures, casting new light on this city's potential. There's an energy pulsing through this university. See yourself in CU Denver. We are CU in the city.
All right, I wanted to highlight that because we really are the CU Denver campus in the middle of Denver. So we have a variety of other campuses. There's the Boulder campus, there's our Anschutz Medical campus, which is in Aurora. We have our new CU South Denver campus, and then we have Colorado Springs. So some things that make our campus unique, given that we are right in the middle of downtown Denver, we only have one residence hall. It only houses around 600 students, and so we are a 95% commuter campus. There's approximately 15,000 students at CU Denver. Another unique piece is we share the Auraria campus with Metro State and also Community College of Denver. So we call it a tri-institutional campus. So again, there's 15,000 CU Denver students, but there's additional Metro students and CCD students on our campus as well. Of our 15,000 students, around 11,000 are undergrad. 48% of our undergrads are male, 52% female, etc. And then you can also see 43% of our undergraduates are students of color. 57% of our incoming first-year students are students of color. 35% of our population is first generation. And I think this is a really big piece to highlight, is that 67% of our graduates remain in Colorado. I think that's really important because when we talk about community and civic engagement, when we are preparing our students to be engaged in their communities after graduation, it's so essential because so many of them, 2/3 of our students, stay in Colorado after they leave CU Denver. So some of how we approached our Civic Health and Equity Initiative process. We really wanted to be able to understand CU Denver's community engagement initiatives. CU Denver started as sort of an extension campus of CU Boulder, and we were predominantly more graduate programs. Our undergraduate population has really grown in the last 10 years, which has changed the culture of our institution as well. But being right in the downtown area, so many of our programs from their initiation have really been focused on community engagement. When I talk with folks across campus, what I hear is it's just built into who we are. It's part of our fabric. With that being said, there is very little centralization of community engagement at our campus. In counterpart to my colleagues who worked on this initiative, I'm housed in student affairs, and so that's a unique aspect of how we are housed. And then there are some little offices in different schools and colleges that focus on community engagement. Some of them are larger, some of them are small. But as far as centralization of tracking initiatives, assessment, none of that has really been done previously. So this project for us was really establishing our baseline, really understanding what are our community engagement initiatives, what is happening across campus, and then also being part of Denver and the metro area. We have hundreds of community partners, and so it's really difficult to know what is going on. The second part of that is we didn't only want to understand what we were doing as a campus, but we wanted to understand our actual impact upon the community. Last year, our institution launched our whole brand as CU in the City, and so it's been a huge priority of our chancellor to now understand our community impact. So this project fit well with our new chancellor's initiatives and priorities as well. We did also sign on for the Civic Action Plan with Campus Compact, so we're working for that. And then ultimately, we viewed this project as a way to determine our readiness for Carnegie application. Written into our vision statement is that by 2020, our institution would be recognized for excellence in a variety of areas, including community engagement. So we really wanted to see if that's accurate. And so Carnegie application is a way for us to operationalize our excellence in community engagement. Some things that we did. Our committee development, we don't have a community engagement advisory committee at this point. We have had some high impact practice committees and things. So when we developed our committee, we tried to be very intentional about who was included. So we invited folks that had previously been on the high impact practice task force related to research, internships, service learning, etc. We invited representatives from the different schools and colleges. Not all of them accepted that invitation, sadly. We also invited our institutional research folks. We view them as our essential partners in this because, as I mentioned, we don't have a centralized office that does community engagement. I'm a one professional staff office. I really relied on graduate assistants and their projects to help with this initiative as well. What I would say is, you can also see on this slide is our timeline. And you can notice that our timeline is not complete yet. This project really turned into a 2-year project for us. I guess it's one of those things, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And so we really did want to take the time to collect as much information as possible. I think also a factor really driving this, like I mentioned, is that this is our baseline project. We don't have this information previously. So taking our time to really collect the data and analyze it to be able to understand where we stand in civic and community engagement as an institution. And so right now we are still in our data collection process, and then we also are in the process of collecting focus groups. In the spring, we will actually be working with IR to analyze all of our data and do our sort of evaluation of civic health indicators. The goal is then to be able to decide if we want to, request an application for Carnegie to complete our civic action plan, and then also to do a launch, to really launch that we are CU in the city, and this is our commitment to community engagement, and really celebrate that. So that's our timeline currently. Some pieces. So our research process, very similar to some other folks. We did a literature review. We developed our advisory board. This was a team of 4 folks that really did a bunch of the work. So it was myself, and then one of my counterparts at our College of Architecture and Planning, and then 2 graduate assistants. And so we really looked at a variety of different instruments, did literature review, and developed our questionnaires. And I wanted to pause here and really highlight the value of the collective impact piece of this, because the literature review, the resources, the development of our surveys and our assessment tools, all of that, I honestly don't feel would have been possible without the collective impact piece. To have the support of Cecil and DU and Campus Compact, the Mountain West, and also my partner, campuses, was really essential in driving this and allowing this to even be possible for our campus. We did initial surveys. It would send it to the committee. We'd send it to who I came to call our overlords, as they referenced earlier, and really doing all of that. So that was really essential for us, is having that collective impact piece made something possible for our campus that I honestly feel like wouldn't have been feasible otherwise. So we did do multiple tests. We did a lot of that. Our distribution and dissemination, we have the support of our chancellor, which has been phenomenal. She sent out an announcement. She sent out numerous announcements. We also distributed through our listserv channels, organic channels. And so we did 2 surveys. We did a community or a campus inventory survey, asking campus folks to fill out the survey to understand what are they doing in the community. And we sent that to staff, faculty, administrators, students, basically anybody who would fill out our survey. And then from there, we also sent out a community impact assessment to community organizations. I would say we're still in a little bit of phase 1 in that we're trying to get more campus responses. And then the phase 2 of that is, as we get those campus responses, we are then sending their identified community organizations the community impact assessment, so that we're trying to get a full picture. The goal is we would like to have at least 200 responses. And the way that we're doing some of that as well is every month we're doing newsletters about the initiative. And we're covering a different civic health indicator each month. And in that, we're sort of describing, what is this? What is, public political engagement or social connectedness. And then we're sharing some of our initial results, folks on campus who are doing that work, and then really highlighting some of the initial data that we have. And the goal with that is to, one, sort of report out what we're finding, to raise awareness of this initiative, and then also included in every newsletter is the survey so that campus folks or community folks can complete that. So we're collecting ongoing data through those newsletters as well. All right, so I just wanted to share some of our initial findings. And again, we're still in the middle of data collection, but some of the things that we found, we had both closed and open-ended questions. And this is a tool that we use that really did sort of a word cloud of the responses from those open-ended questions. And we found it really neat to sort of compare and contrast them and to see some similarities, you know, community, student, volunteer, participation, education, internships. So we started to see some similar understandings of what the goals were of a civic and community engagement partnership. The next, and I hope this is okay to read, it looks a little small. But we asked everybody who completed both the campus inventory and the community impact assessment to identify what areas or which of the civic health indicators they had worked on. And it was really interesting because the chart on the top that you see, that's actually the campus one. So we've had 90 respondents. The one on the bottom is actually from the community, and we've only had 37 responses there. But it's interesting to notice the difference. The community was much more, I would say, liberal in identifying which indicators we are accomplishing through those partnerships, while the campus folks were much more conservative on the indicators that they felt we were we were accomplishing through our civic and community engagement initiatives. So it was really interesting to see that. Again, it will be better when we have completed our data collection and get a full perspective on that. You know, seeing that we have 0% under political engagement, I know that our political science department has not completed the survey yet, but it's interesting to see those results. This is another one here. I'll go pretty quickly. We asked about mutually beneficial relationships. What we also asked about was the length of the relationship, and we saw that those with longer partnerships with the institution tended to say agree or strongly agree in that they were having a mutually beneficial relationship. Folks and organizations who had only worked with the campus for a year or less than tended to be more in the disagree area. So it was helpful for us to be able to see those dynamics. We also got to see, we asked some questions of our community engagement as far as how they felt valued as a co-creator of the partnership. And we again saw a similar trend in that folks and organizations that had long-term partnerships with the institution tended to agree or strongly agree that they were valued as a facilitator. All right, this one. The impact of the partnership has had on faculty or staff members. It was really interesting for us to see where this was going. Again, the goal of all of this is to, one, be able to understand what our campus is doing, but also really to drive our civic action and our strategic planning. So this has been really helpful. You know, impacted research directions is relatively low. However, increased the connection to the city was high. So again, this is data that we're going to continuously be looking at and analyzing. Okay. All right, and then this last one, we really talked about, again, some of the co-creation of these partnerships and what folks were getting out of these partnerships. And so this was a little bit more open-ended, but we tried to really look at how were folks interacting together? You know, were they doing processes of feedback and stuff? So these are some of just our initial results. And then in the sake of time, I'm going to move forward to this. What I would say is that there was much more we wanted to do with this initiative. We really liked what UNC did at really looking at, you know, the comprehensive measures of civic health. And we ultimately decided we were trying to be too ambitious with our assessment for this first baseline project. And then what I think is really essential is that we're trying to do this in the midst of a variety of different things. So as I mentioned, we have a chancellor who's less than 2 years old, and she's developed some priorities that we're trying to align with. In the middle of this project, See You in the City as our identity and brand was launched, so we tried to fit in with that. Another area, our School of Public Affairs is leading our anchor institution conversation. Also at a conference at Portland State University, our chancellor announced that we would be developing a city center, which was news to those of us on campus. And so we're in the middle of conversations on what this city center will be, what will the functional areas be, etc. In academic affairs from the CU system has been a conversation on civic literacy assessment for all students, and how does this fit in with that? Also looking at not only within our institution and our system, but how do we fit into the Colorado Civic DNA or the Colorado Civic Health Index? And then at the end of the day is how do we align all of that to determine Carnegie classification readiness, and how do we move forward? Also, what I would mention is our advisory board that started with 4 folks. All 3 of my counterparts on that advisory board have selected other positions and have since left the institution in a variety of ways. So I've really learned that we've planned and planned and planned, and then we've had to refocus and replan. And I think that's been really essential for us to understand and try to be strategic in how we fit into all of these other initiatives and things that are happening as well. So yeah, I think we're sort of just getting started, but I really do, think the collective impact piece of our project was so essential in us being able to undertake this initiative and project. And so a huge shout out to our overlords at DU and Campus Compact of the Mountain West.
Thank you, Megan. So one quick note was that one of the unique things that CU Denver and CSU Pueblo did was try to link this work to identity claims that the university was making, which is a really powerful way to drive this kind of work. So now we have about 10 minutes for questions. And the way we'll do this is if you just enter your question in the chat box, then I'll read them out and we can direct them to different people who presented. So it's open now to questions. And the chat is at the bottom of the screen. So if you just pull that up, then. So while we're waiting, oh, here we go. Okay, so, while we're waiting for questions, another thing I'll note is that something that happened with CSU Pueblo and with CU Denver is that they both got or are getting new presidents or chancellors. And so one thing that they've both done is to try and get in front of those people really quickly to try and leverage that new person with their priorities and the priorities of the project, which I think is really, really powerful, because often when new chancellors or presidents begin, they want to do a new strategic plan. And so if you can get it connected with that work, then it's really powerful. So George Fowler asks, being a librarian, I'm interested if any of you have partnered with your libraries, so higher education libraries, public and or school libraries. That's a great question.
I can't. Yeah, go ahead.
And I think that's our Annie that's on the webinar, if she's still there. So this is Deborah from the University of Northern Colorado. Yes, we're very fortunate in that our associate director from the Office of Engagement also happens to be a librarian at the University of Northern Colorado Michener Libraries. This for us has really been beneficial because it's meant we've had a very natural and synergetic relationship with our local libraries, High Plains Public Libraries. And libraries are natural doorways for community engagement. So we consider our local library district to be one of our key partners, and on our community advisory board for the Civic Health and Equity Initiative, we had folks from the library serving, and they continue to be active with us. So yes, for us, libraries, I think it's an excellent question. They are I'm going to say kind of an example of a low-hanging fruit partner that for many different reasons have their own engagement agendas, but are also open and I think well positioned to partner with institutions of higher education. So that's my piece on that.
I would just add to that going back to the formation of the Civic Health Network more broadly, the State Association of Libraries, we partnered with them very closely and hosted almost all of our community conversations at libraries. Our civic health summits that happen biannually happen at libraries and or through the History Colorado museums that are across the state. So they've been really key partners in elevating this work locally.
And it should be mentioned that libraries historically have civic missions. And so when I was in DC with ADP, we worked with the American Library Association to think through how those can be places where voter registration happens or education for different groups of community members can happen. So we had a question from David, not David who presented, another David, that the session's being recorded and if we'd be willing to share the recording. I need to ask my co-presenters for permission first, so we'll get back to you on that. And then Annie, a librarian, asked how this collaborative work will be shared more broadly. And so one thing I'll mention is that we're writing a paper based on this work and how the collective impact model supported campus efforts. We've also been on a bit of a roadshow, so we presented at Irish Slice. We're going to present at National Campus Compact. However, if you have other ideas about how to share this work, let us know. I think we'll probably try and get it in front of the Civic Health Network in Colorado. And then George, oh, sorry. That's private. So ditto above questions. Is it possible to share assessment? Oh, so the campuses, someone asked if we could share your assessment instruments. So again, I'll get permission from folks with that. We have a Google Drive that we've been using because it's really open and most people use Google Drives. That's been pretty well used. So what we could do if people agree is we can create maybe a Colorado Civic Health and Equity Google Drive that's open to anyone to view resources and also to add resources that they have. Because again, that's that continuous communication and that backbone support, that collective impact just works really well. We probably have time for one more question, if people have one. So of course, what we can do as well is share the contact information for our campus partners and then everyone involved in the project. And I'll just say from my perspective that I've been really astounded by how quickly campuses moved with this work. One thing that we did notice and that Megan touched on and David touched on was that this is probably a 2-year project. We tried to do this in a 1-year thing, but I think the process of doing the civic audit, maybe you could do that throughout a year and build momentum and awareness, and then map onto that the community engagement assessment. And then the other piece is that, again, trying to link it with university priorities or campus priorities, and the unique identity of the institution is really key. And I'll turn it over to Stephanie. Do you have anything else you'd like to say in conclusion?
No, I think that's it. It's just, I think as you said, that the setting maybe a slower timeline for being able to do some of this work, and it really, I appreciate the ability to partner with, of course, they're members of Campus Compact. We get to see them in various and sundry meetings and goings on, but this has been a unique way to be able to work more intentionally and understand a lot more clearly the real identities of communities and how that informs the identity of the institution. And I think it's been very interesting work to be able to be involved with.
So I want to open it up to our campus partners and Liliana. Does anyone else want to say anything in conclusion before we close out the webinar?
I'll just say something really quick. It's actually getting back to George's point real quickly. This is David at CSU Pueblo. We had interviewed the library chair as one of our interviews and discovered, unbeknownst to me, that our library has the Southern Colorado Chicano Archives, and that has been an ongoing student project as well, developing that. And I am going to say it was probably the richest experience that I uncovered in our interviews. So yes to libraries.
Anything else in conclusion?
Thank you all.
So
we need a second grant for when we're.
Yes, we do. And the last piece too is that collective impact work works really well. So if you're thinking about this model and you have institutions or organizations in your region, if you use these 5 steps, and we use mostly free resources, we only gave the campuses $2,000 a piece. I don't think the money was the pivotal point. It was really that collective impact. So it's doable, and I'll get permission from everyone, and we'll share as many resources as people feel comfortable, and then we'll also share our contact information. So as you're moving forward, we're eager to support your work. So thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.